I cut my lips shaving, there's a thunderstorm outside, and I'm way past deadline. Let's do this.
One of the hip, cool memes the kids, and some journalists, are using nowadays is to use Dark Souls as a descriptor for how difficult something is. Everyone loves to compare things to Dark Souls, and no games have it worse than the ones trying to cement themselves in the growing genre of Soulslike games. Obviously, these games are deserving of the comparison, and Nioh welcomes the accusation wholeheartedly. Yes, Nioh is a 3D Souls-like game, which, if we were living in a different timeline, would just be called an action RPG that wants you to know exactly where a large part of its inspiration comes from. Its opening aims to drive that home.
It seems death won't stop chasing me.
His name is William Adams. He's blonde, blue-eyed, and incarcerated in the dirty town of London, which, as everyone knows, is the primary inspiration for most Dark Souls environments. At heart, Nioh isn't distant from the Dark Souls formula, but because it withholds its nuance until you're reminded of what Dark Souls plays like, it's easier to separate the two in your mind. The starting area is a medieval prison that you fight your way out of with nothing but a sword and whatever you pick up off the guards on your way out, complete with knights in full plate armor and combat that plays out methodically slow. By the end of this level, we're caught up on William's story, have a villain and motivation to chase him, and a clever metaphor for Nioh's departure from Dark Souls. It isn't until it reaches the land of the rising sun, that's Japan, that Nioh reveals its true colors, a much faster, more aggressive action RPG that demands ruthlessness and consistency similar to Ninja Gaiden. This begins the tale of duality that weaves itself throughout Nioh as it seeks to find its place between its inspirations within the same genre, and it begins in its combat. Every weapon type you can equip has 3 different stances, each with a separate moveset that you can take with them. Some work better in one stance than others. Usually the low stance is for dodging and quick successive strikes, the mid stance is good for the give and take of blocking and attacking, and the high stance is your heavy duty guard breaker for when your opponent lacks a flaw in their defense and is being a huge piece of shit. Finding the right stance and the right weapon to take down different enemies is great, but it becomes especially fulfilling when faced with an enemy that can also use stances against you. It becomes a battle of wits or a challenge to see what either of you might have as a trump card. You can snap between melee and ranged combat in Nioh with the push of a button. Use your bow to fake enemies out or deliver a finishing blow after creating some distance between you. Stagger one enemy and in the small pause, pull out your rifle to snipe another. There's nothing more satisfying in Nioh than being able to swap between these 2 types of weapons in order to deal with multiple enemies in a single encounter. Now, this is all familiar, but different, with foreign elements thrown into it to separate itself. Things like an active reload to recover all your stamina after a combo chain, like a crippling stagger when you ignore it, and an invincibility mode that you can maintain by killing enemies. These turn every encounter in Nioh into a frantic scuffle, a scenario where the cooler head prevails. It kind of reminds me of The Tale of Zatoichi. The sword fights in that movie end as soon as they begin, and Zatoichi wins his fights by remaining focused and centered. That's what the fighting in Nioh feels like. But let's say you don't want to engage enemies head-on like the swashbuckling pirate William Adams is. Nioh's got options for you, too. Become a ninja, complete with a customizable ninja kit of various tools and weaponry and an emphasis on trapping for quick kills. Be a mage and utilize talismans to buff yourself and debuff enemies, as well as imbue your weapons with heavy elemental damage. Regardless of how you decide to play, everything is totally customizable, and their movesets expanded with the use of the skill points you earn by utilizing associated weapons and techniques. There's even special moves for each weapon that you can assign and adjust by stance. You can play around with it and create a unique moveset for your specific character, but the frequency that you gain skill points for all of these and the freedom you have to pick whatever skills you want show off what Nioh really wants you to do. Plenty of skills in each tree are practical for other fighting styles. You might grab that ninja skill that increases your ammo capacity, then the magic skill that increases your chances of getting back ammo after using it. Also, you can have plenty of arrows to snipe from afar and ambush people. More than adhere to one specific profession, you're incentivized to embrace all of the abilities capable of you, to take from multiple places you're aware of and mold that into power. It sounds like I'm reaching for a metaphor. right? Well, I am, but given Nioh's obsession with loot and the crazy amount of stat bonuses you can get from just about everything you equip, that fruit is hanging pretty low. Every piece of armor, every accessory, and every weapon William adorns himself with bestows any number of bonuses. From something as general as earning more gold for defeating enemies to effects as specific as converting your spirit attribute into defense in the high stance whenever you're low on health. There's easily 100 of these different stat bonuses that you can randomly get from the loot that drops off enemies, and the loot porn is fierce. Like an excessive amount, way more than anyone can fit in their pockets. Usually the increase is in percentages, 4% here, 2% there. It's rare to see any one bonus exceed marginal numbers. But that's 11 slots of equipment that can all provide a little bit of the same buff. Multiply that 4% to attacks in the mid stance by 11, and you've got a big bonus that influences how you might play the game. But what about the Guardian Spirits that also provide stat bonuses and give more stat bonuses for having a high spirit attribute? What about the clan you decide to join for the multiplayer component of Nioh that has their own passive advantages? How do you decide which one to pick, and how do they match up with your playstyle and your current stat bonuses?
With the many fountains William can draw from, it's not surprising to see people pass on Nioh. At first glance, that loot system is intimidating. It's not familiar to the genre, it can get incredibly specific, and having that many combinations can be paralyzing. But Nioh is dreadfully aware of this and provides guidance to those of us apprehensive about taking the first steps.
The loot and the stats they have might be random, but they all belong to an ensemble of equipment. The more significant pieces of armor you can find belong to a set that provide further bonuses the more pieces of that set you have equipped. These special effects are always the same. Since the set bonuses aren't random, you can use that armor set as a base and work on getting more special effects that add to or complement those benefits. You can visit the blacksmith to change what stat bonuses your equipment provides, feed loot to your favorite pieces to make them stronger, and change the appearance of those pieces to look like other armor sets. Even after you've settled on how you want to equip yourself, Nioh reasserts that there's still more available for you to experiment with. You can also get a haircut here. I wouldn't suggest getting a haircut from a one-eyed blacksmith though.
Alright, put your head on the anvil and hold real still.
Nioh's obsession with loot is complemented and rivaled by its obsession with information. Nioh is a work of historical fiction. William Adams was a real ex-privateer that sailed to Japan, got stuck there, and found himself swept up in Tokugawa Ieyasu's war to unify Japan. Everything in this game has lore attached to it based on real-life legends and people, right down to how everyone refers to William as Anjin because it's easier to pronounce. All the demons you fight have extensive descriptions and origin explanations. All the characters you meet were once real people and have biographies and legends of their exploits. Every location has a record of its significance to history, and every weapon and armor in the game has a pronunciation guide, description of its appearance, reasoning for why it was designed that way, historical significance, original designer, and if applicable, mythology in its description box. Nioh wants you to care about the culture you're being exposed to. That's why extended lore is locked behind challenges. They want you to associate more information with success.
The amount of information that you get for every piece of equipment is so plentiful that you start to envision the kind of character that would have them.
It may be text on a screen, but this text is a suggestion on how to use the veritable piece of culture you've slapped onto your brawny Irish sailor. A suggestion that might persuade you to learn how to use a new weapon and try out a different tactic in battle, but coming from a place of cultural significance. Those item descriptions like to explain how the person wearing that armor usually behaved in battle. The weapon that might complete the set could be one that you're not familiar with using. And familiarity is an actual stat on each weapon that grows the more William uses it. Consider what it means for William Adams, a man in a foreign land, to become familiar with parts of its culture, to gain strength from donning traditional samurai armor and mastering their weapons, to then find himself a prominent figure in Ieyasu's army. It's his growing identification with Japanese culture, represented by you, the player, unlocking more lore entries and then basing your equipment choices on familiarity, stat boosts, quests and armor sets that makes him stronger. It helps that Nioh treats its source material with respect. On a surface level, William's chase is only an excuse for us to learn of people of great significance from feudal Japan, to play through a pivotal moment in the country's history. It's not intended to convey a message so much as convey an attitude or opinion of the individuals it attempts to represent, and it's shockingly moderate. Nothing about the narrative is treated with any particular glorification, but neither is it thrown under the bus. William is critical of Japanese customs, but isn't completely averse to it. Tokugawa Ieyasu is painted as this unfortunate asshole, being both respected for his efforts and sacrifices made in unifying Japan, but also criticized for those sacrifices and his attitude about them. If you're new here, this show tries, keyword on tries, to find a positive takeaway from the games we play. A GC positive takeaway. Alright. I'll stop. And I think there truly is something to take away from the way Nioh treats its source material, something that even if you think it butchers said source material, is still evoked from it. But there's a more potent message for us in Nioh, one that I think stands out more to me in part because of how relatable it is. It's about finding your place in a culture you don't feel a part of. This is a real subject for me, but I'm not going to let that stop me from speaking my mind. And let's be honest, when have I ever stopped myself from speaking my mind? 33 minutes? Holy shit! William is a sailor betrayed by his own country. He's declared a criminal, and by nature of the guardian spirit he's had since he was young, is an outcast in his own birthplace. Fate has it that he winds up in Japan, a land where things like magic and guardian spirits are common, but full of alien customs and traditions. Despite being familiar and comfortable with aspects of these two cultures, William is an outsider to both. When William makes the effort to impress Ieyasu's generals upon meeting them, he's a damn foreigner. But when he tries to speak to Hanzo's apprentice, he's dismissed as another drunk samurai. His identity crisis, only made worse by having his guardian spirit, something that is essentially a part of him, taken away, is much like this era's Japan. Two warring factions within one entity. Both of these descriptors are at odds with one another, and William's frustration does not come from being addressed as either one, but from a failure to assimilate.
It can be the most frustrating experience in the world to feel like you stand out when the only thing you want to do is blend in. And when those feelings are confirmed, you break.
And you can do whatever you want to run away from it. You can call yourself Anjin or GC or whatever else is easier to pronounce. You can adopt the fashion sense, cut your hair the same way, even take an interest in more particular activities. But you will never be 100% a part of that culture. There's always going to be that other part of you, even if you get really good at hiding it. And to that, Nioh says, own it. Maybe you're both. Maybe you're neither. Maybe you're a combination. Maybe this middle ground between one and the other is something brand new of which you are the pioneer. Pioneer might be the wrong word. Maybe you're the pilot. This is why the title Western Samurai is so goddamn important. William's journey sees him a respected member of Ieyasu's group in large part because his Western identity supplies him with a different way of thinking. The turning point of William's identity crisis is when he uses his ability to step outside of the culture he is a part of to improve the conditions of those he shares that culture with. Saving a hostage, rushing to the aid of a decoy on a suicide mission, electing not to kill an enemy general after defeating them in combat. Ieyasu himself begins to respect William more with every unorthodox decision, understanding the strength in having a person like that around. And wouldn't you know it, the tide of war begins to turn to Ieyasu's favor the further William begins to understand himself.
I mean, the boss you fight at this turning point is a giant two-headed skeleton. I can't possibly be too off base with this, come on.
The unification of William's sense of self brings with it the unification of Japan, a sense of peace after an exhaustive turmoil.
There really is too much to say about Nioh. Had I tried to cover all of it, we would have easily been here for an hour. So instead I focused on the things that were relevant to the message I felt it conveyed. Nioh itself is much like its protagonist, born from different concepts but proudly accepting of its hybrid nature.
It honestly feels like the first Souls-like game I've played that isn't a creation of From Software's, that gets it. It understands what players want out of this kind of action RPG, but isn't seeking to be a one-to-one recreation of that. It has its own ideas of what this kind of game can be and wants to introduce the culture that's built around it to foreign concepts that they might like. And rather than feel like a bad compromise or lesser than that which it is clearly inspired by, Nioh stands on its own two different sock-wearing feet. Spent the whole video without making terrible metaphors, but here I am!
That's all I've got today. Until next time, my name's GC. Remember that you are amazing and keep on playing positive.